I'm Stuart Russell. I'm very sorry that I can't be in Morocco for the meeting, but I'm very happy to be invited to talk to you today about AI and the future of work, among other. So I will share my screen and present my talk. So I hope this is working. So there's been a lot written about AI in the last few months. And one of the subjects that has actually been on the radar of both researchers and governments for quite a few years is the impact on the future of work. So to understand what's going on, we have to understand, I think, what AI is about. So almost everyone agrees that AI is about making intelligent machines. And exactly what that means is up for debate. Without a doubt, since the beginning of the field, purpose as AI researchers has been to create what we might call general purpose AI, or sometimes called AGI, artificial general intelligence, meaning AI systems that can quickly learn high quality behavior in any task environment. And it's also widely agreed that if we were able to create such systems, they would very quickly exceed human capabilities by a very large margin in nearly every area, because AI systems or computers have much faster processing abilities, much higher input and output bandwidth, much larger memories, and much greater ability to communicate information to each other. It's also important to recognize that this kind of general purpose AI does not yet exist, although some of my colleagues believe that systems such as GPT-4 are some of the first examples of this technology, others, including myself. So if we do succeed in creating this kind of AI, and if we succeed in incorporating it safely and successfully into our society, the potential benefits are enormous. Because this type of AI can do everything that we are currently able to do, except it can do it at much less cost and on a much greater scale. And one of the things we know how to do is for at least a small fraction of the population in the world to create a technological and social environment that provides a high standard of living for a fairly large number of people. So we should be able to do that for everyone on Earth, which would be approximately a 10-fold increase in the GDP of the world. So raising everyone on Earth to a kind of respectable standard of living by the standards of the more advanced economies. And the net present value of that, so the cash equivalent of that increased income stream, would be about $13.5 quadrillion. So that's a lower bound on the value of general purpose AI as a technology, because of course we could do a lot more than just replicate the living standards of the upper middle class in the Netherlands, for example. We could have a much better civilization than the one we have right now. We could have greatly improved and individualized healthcare, expert tutoring for every child, more effective scientific research, which is already starting to happen, and much more productive and cooperative politics. Actually, that last point was a joke. So here's a quotation. When we face this question of AI systems that are able to do everything that we currently call work, here's one observation. If every instrument could accomplish its own work, obeying or anticipating the will of others, if in like manner the shuttle would weave and the plectrum touch the lyre without a hand to guide them, chief workmen would not want servants. So this was a prediction that artificial intelligence or automation would lead to mass unemployment made by Aristotle around 350 BCE. So this is not a new topic, as I said at the beginning. Probably one of the most famous papers on this topic was by the economist John Maynard Keynes in 1930, who said, thus, for the first time since his creation, man will be faced with his permanent problem, how to use his freedom from pressing economic cares to live wisely and agreeably and well. So that's a difficult problem, and we're not yet facing that problem. But if in 2 or 3 decades we did face that problem, are we prepared to actually live wisely and agreeably and well? This is a really important question. And so far, the news is not good. And this is an image from the film Wall-E, which shows in cartoon form, even though it's a very serious problem, the enfeeblement of the human race. So as we lose the incentive to learn how to operate our own civilization because machines are operating it for us and looking after our every need, the human beings then no longer engage in education, become highly subject to external control and unable to function as individual agents in the world. And this is what the film Wall-E is trying to show. So governments are certainly aware of these issues, and one of the answers that they've come up with is that actually we will retrain all of the drivers and chefs and agricultural workers and lawyers and screenwriters and so on as data scientists. But I think it doesn't take much thought to realize that this is just not a solution. The world does not need billions of data scientists, but we are talking about potentially the disappearance of billions of current occupations. Perhaps the world needs a few million data scientists, and right now it probably could absorb more than it has. But this is going to be a short-term phenomenon. And it's also worth noting that AI systems are becoming very good at data science and at computer programming. So many of these retrained people might not even find work within a few years. We're also seeing a lot of wishful thinking. So I'm using rose-colored font here on this slide to indicate that these are all wishful thinking statements. Some of them, I believe, quite cynical. You'll often hear phrases like AI will empower humans and not replace them. AI will automate tasks and not jobs, as if once all my tasks are automated, I would still have a job with no tasks. AI will take care of the tedious tasks, leaving you more time for the interesting parts. That is, assuming that your employer is willing to pay you to just work on the interesting parts, even though most of the work is already being done by machines. And sometimes you will find claims among economists of a more formal kind, basically a theorem showing that technological unemployment is possible. And this is a quote from a real economist. Any advance that increases labor productivity also tends to raise the demand for labor and thus employment and wages. So that sounds very plausible, but it's not true. And we can imagine, for example, a technology that simply creates a twin of every human being. And that twin is happy to show up and do your job or any of the new jobs that might be created, and happy to work for nothing. So under that circumstance, it's obvious, and even economists would understand that the twin is the one who's going to be employed and not the human. And so although it does increase employment, it's employment of non-humans, which is not really helping the situation. I found it helpful to think about the impact of technology by thinking about what happens to employment as technology improves. And it's a little bit confusing because, in fact, the effects go in both directions. So when a technology first exists, so that's the left-hand end of this curve, it's extremely expensive and not very useful. So this is the unaffordable end, or where the task is actually impossible. The technology cannot do it at all. So 20 years ago, you could have talked about self-driving cars, but it was simply impossible to build one. And so there were very few people employed 20 years ago in the self-driving car industry. But then once the technology becomes feasible, then people will start to adopt it. And we've seen this kind of thing, for example, in the manufacture of cars. Originally, they were very, very expensive hand-built machines that very, very few people could afford. But then once mass production methods were developed, they became cheap, the demand for cars exploded, and so did employment. So there were huge factories built all over the world, building cars, and millions of people were employed in those factories. But then as technology improves further, the product becomes cheaper, but the demand for the product saturates. So I don't need 17 cars. Once I can afford one or two cars, whatever I need for transportation in my family, I don't keep buying more and more cars. And so the demand saturates, but the technology keeps on improving to produce those cars. And so then we start to see reduced employment. And this is true in the car industry, in the steel industry, in almost all areas of manufacturing. We are on this downslope now where technology is producing more output using fewer and fewer workers. So when economists talk about how to think through the policy implications of AI technology, they will often talk about complementing and substituting technology. So a complementing technology is one that increases employment, and a substituting technology is one that decreases employment. But the difficulty is, how can you tell? And the fact is that they aren't properties of a technology at all, because the impact of a given technology will depend on the demand response as that technology makes it cheaper and cheaper to produce some given kind of goods or services. And the demand response increases dramatically as the product becomes cheaper, then you will employ more. So it's a complementing technology. But if people don't need any more of that thing, or the market is already saturated, then it becomes a substituting technology, even though it's the same technology. So I think the interim solution for the time being is to try to find areas of application for AI technology that meet important unmet needs. So those would necessarily be things that are not currently met by human beings. And so looking for applications of AI that have economic value through displacing human workers is simply meaning that you're on the downslope of the curve that I showed you in the previous slide. So instead, I think we should look for applications where the need is large, but is not being met because it's too expensive or too difficult to do it with human beings. And here are a few examples. Education, not in the sense of classroom education, although that's still a huge need in some countries, but in the form of the kind of individual tutoring that we know can help to fulfill the potential of every child, but cannot be done using human beings because it's simply too expensive. Similar arguments can be made about healthcare, environmental cleanup, graffiti removal, cargo inspection. All of these things we don't currently do because they're too difficult and expensive to do with human beings. So ultimately, of course, all industries will end up on the right-hand side of that curve. The demand will saturate, the technology will improve, and employment will decrease. So when AI systems can do everything that we currently think of as work, and any new job that comes along as well, then we really have to face the fact human beings will not need to be working, and will be in Keynes's situation of facing that fundamental problem. How will we live wisely and agreeably and well? And this is not necessarily a disaster. If you think about writing science fiction 10,000 years ago, before the first development of mass agriculture, anyone who described a future in which millions of people would go into windowless buildings and do the same thing thousands of times over and over again every day, and do that pretty much every day until they died, you would say, well, that's ridiculous. We would never, ever choose a future like that. But that's the future that we chose. We've been using people as robots in many of these occupations for thousands of years, and this is now coming to an end. And as I said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we do have to figure out what will human beings be doing. And I think they will be mostly in interpersonal roles where, First of all, we have a comparative advantage because we understand directly through our own experience what it's like to be in a given situation as a human being. And also, I think in many of these roles, we will actually not want machines to be filling those roles. But there are interpersonal professions right now, some of them relatively high status, like psychiatrists, but many of them, like childcare, very low status. And the reason is that we do not have the foundation in the human sciences to make those roles effective and high added value, which means that we need to prepare for this future by creating that foundation in the human sciences so that people can be effective in these roles. And that means not only just doing all the scientific research, but then reorienting our education system to train people for those professions, and understanding how the overall structure of our economy is going to adjust to this new reality. So in summary, AI has enormous potential to provide benefits, and that is creating unstoppable momentum. But success in creating general purpose AI really asks this enormously difficult question: what will humans do, and how will we prepare for that society? There are many groups and centers and think tanks working on these questions. I would say what's missing actually is a vision of that future that is not a Wall-E future, but a future where people are gainfully, let's say, engaged in their society, in interacting and providing for others. And simple wishful thinking, which we see a lot of, is no substitute for really thinking through the policy changes that are required. With that, I will say thank you, and I wish you a very enjoyable conversation.